All right, folks, we are going to go ahead and do a little bit of annotating together. We are in Letter from Birmingham Jail by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Let's go ahead and get our annotations going. So I'm going to start us off in the background paragraph just so we can get a little bit of context. So follow along with me as I read. By the late 1950s, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had emerged as a key figure of the civil rights movement. During the Kennedy administration, Dr. King was arrested in April 1963 for protesting racial segregation in Birmingham, Alabama. As he sat in jail, he read a newspaper article in which 8 white clergymen criticized him for unwise and untimely demonstrations. Without proper writing paper, Dr. King drafted a response, this letter, in the cramped margins of that newspaper. Okay, so right off the bat, one major important detail that I see is that Dr. King was arrested in April of 1963 for protesting. So I'm just going to simplify, arrested for protesting. Okay, I'm going to circle the year 1963 just so I can remember. As he sat in jail, he read a newspaper article in which 8 white clergymen criticized him for unwise and untimely demonstrations. So maybe I don't know what clergyman means, so I'm going to circle it. I'm going to put a question mark right there because maybe I don't know what that word means. But in any case, he read a newspaper article in which 8 white people criticized him for unwise and untimely demonstrations. Okay, so he was being criticized. Oh, I'm sorry, my cats are being rambunctious. Okay. So he's being criticized by, I'm just going to say by white people, for unwise and untimely demonstrations. Without proper writing paper, he drafted a response in the cramped margins of that newspaper. That's just a cool little fun fact that he drafted that letter, in the margins of the newspaper. But we want to make sure that we remember that this is a response. So he's responding. MLK is responding to criticism. Okay, let's go ahead and read the letter proper now. 16th April 1963. My dear fellow clergymen. Okay, right off the bat, that word clergyman came in again, but it's accompanied by this word fellow. Okay, so if they're fellow people, fellow whatevers to Martin Luther King, they must have similar backgrounds or similar stories or similar jobs maybe. And if I'm remembering correctly, MLK was a preacher, right? So if these people are his fellows, they must also be preachers or pastors. So I'm going to go ahead and write my inference down that clergyman means pastors. I'll put a little cross there so that I remember. Okay. Paragraph 1. While confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement calling my present activities unwise and untimely. Seldom do I pause to answer criticism of my work and ideas. If I sought to answer all the criticisms that crossed my desk, my secretaries would have little time for anything other than such correspondence in the course of the day, and I would have no time for constructive work. Okay, so right off the bat, I noticed that he's using, ironically, he's using evidence from their letters to address the criticism. Okay. And then he's saying, seldom do I pause to answer criticism of my work and ideas. So I'm just going to say he rarely addresses critics. Okay, so that last half of that is just basically telling us that he rarely addresses the critics, okay? But then we're down here. But since I feel that you are men of genuine goodwill and that your criticisms, can you see that? Okay, are sincerely set forth, I want to try to answer your statement in what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms. So one thing I notice here is he uses the words patient and reasonable to describe how he's going to address this. And he's kind of setting a tone here, right? He's setting a tone. He's being patient. Even if he could be doing something better. Okay, now we're in paragraph 2. I think I should indicate why I am here in Birmingham, since you have been influenced by the view which argues against outsiders coming in. I have the honor of serving as president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, an organization operating in every southern state, with headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. We have some 85 affiliated organizations across the South, and one of them is the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights. Frequently, we share staff, educational, and financial resources with our affiliates. Several months ago, the affiliate here in Birmingham asked us to be on call to engage in a nonviolent direct action program if such were deemed necessary. We readily consented, and when the hour came, we lived up to our promise. So I, along with several members of my staff, am here because I was invited here. I am here because I have organizational ties here. Okay, so I'm going to bracket down here, put a star, and then I want to summarize over here, because this whole paragraph is basically just him showing, it's MLK showing why he's there, why he's in Birmingham, and that he has every right to be there. Please excuse my cats making noise. Okay, so that's basically what paragraph 2 is giving us. Paragraph 2 is giving us the reasons why MLK is in Birmingham, because if we remember, these clergymen are criticizing him for unwise and untimely demonstrations and are probably saying that he didn't really have a reason to be in Birmingham, right? So let's go ahead and keep reading and see what we find. Paragraph 3. But more basically, I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the prophets of the 8th century BC left their villages and carried their "Thus saith the Lord" far beyond the boundaries of their hometowns, and just as the Apostle Paul left his village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to the far corners of the Greco-Roman world, so am I compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my own hometown. Like Paul, I must constantly respond to the Macedonian call for aid. Okay, so those of us who maybe didn't grow up in church, who didn't grow up understanding a lot of this kind of biblical stuff that MLK is talking about, because remember, he's a pastor. He's addressing pastors, so he's probably using these allusions and these references for a reason. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a little arrow here, because even if I don't know, even if I have no idea what any of this actually means, I can recognize it as a reference to the Bible or to Christianity, right? So he's referencing the Bible. And I think that's because he wants to connect with these other pastors. Okay, and even I'm going to go ahead and talk and just say he's making an allusion, because I recognize that as a literary device, okay? And I'm also going to put a star right here in this first sentence, but more basically, I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. And I think this ties back to our note over here talking about why he's there, that he has every right to be there. So I'm going to go ahead and draw an arrow from that to this, because this is the most important reason that he's here. Okay. All right, paragraph 4. Moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow provincial outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives outside the United States can never be considered an outsider. Oh, excuse me, I read that wrong. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. Okay, so this paragraph is really interesting, and it kind of talks about some different ideas. So one of the things that struck me first was I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. So he's saying we're all related, or we're all tied together. I like that idea of being tied together better. Okay. Also, I notice here, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I recognize that as a famous quote, and I'm going to write just a little personal reaction. I've heard this before. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. This word network, tied in a single garment of destiny, it shows our connections. Okay. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow provincial outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. So this, to me, connects to the I Have a Dream speech when he talks about an exile, being an exile in your own land. So African Americans being exiles in their own land. So that's a connection that I see between this text and the I Have a Dream speech. Okay, let's go ahead to paragraph 5. You deplore the demonstrations taking place in Birmingham, but your statement, I am sorry to say, fails to express a similar concern for the conditions that brought about the demonstrations. I am sure that none of you want to rest content with the superficial kind of social analysis that deals merely with effects and does not grapple with underlying causes. It is unfortunate that demonstrations are taking place in Birmingham, but it is even more unfortunate that the city's white power structure left the Negro community with no alternative. So, this right here feels important. So he's saying that the black community had no other option but to demonstrate. Okay? And I also think that this first line of paragraph 5 is really important. You deplore the demonstrations taking place in Birmingham, but your statement fails to express a similar concern for the conditions that brought about the demonstrations. So he's saying that these people are upset about the demonstrations, about the protests, and not the actual reasons for the protests. And this reminds me of Louisville 2020. Breonna Taylor. Of all the people who criticized the protests as opposed to what happened to this woman, it reminds me of Ferguson 2014. It reminds me of the demonstrations for Trayvon Martin. It reminds me, quite frankly, of almost all Black Lives Matter protests. Oops. It reminds me of the fact that some people are more upset by the protests than the reasons that the people are protesting. So I'm seeing a connection between what MLK is writing in 1963 and what we're experiencing in 2020. Okay, let's go to paragraph 6. In any nonviolent campaign, there are 4 basic steps: collection of the facts to determine whether injustices exist, negotiation, self-purification, and direct action. We have gone through all these steps in Birmingham. There can be no gainsaying the fact that racial injustice engulfs this community. Birmingham is probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States. Its ugly record of brutality is widely known. Negroes have experienced grossly unjust treatment in the courts. There have been more unsolved bombings of Negro homes and churches in Birmingham than in any other city in the nation. These are the hard, brutal facts of the case. On the basis of these conditions, Negro leaders sought to negotiate with the city fathers, but the latter consistently refused to engage in good faith negotiation. Okay, I want to backtrack to the beginning of paragraph 6, because I think that this is important. He's telling us that there are 4 basic steps, and those steps are collection of the facts, that's step 1. Negotiation is step 2. Self-purification is step 3, and direct action is step 4. And then he says, we have gone through all of these steps in Birmingham. So that, again, ties back to this annotation talking about how the black community had no other option, right? Because he's talking about there are 4 steps, and the last one is demonstrations. So we went through the 3 steps, but you didn't give us any other options. Okay, so again, in paragraph 6, the latter half of paragraph 6, he's going to talk to us a little bit about what he's done, okay? So he goes, Birmingham is probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States, and then he gives us all of these facts and data, okay? Facts and data. Okay, and this relates back to here, where he gives us our 4 steps. This is step 1. So in paragraph 6, he's showing us step 1 of a nonviolent campaign. Okay, so I'm guessing from this point forward that he's going to talk about the other steps that he went through. All right, let's go ahead and see if I'm right. Paragraph 7. Then, last September, came the opportunity to talk with leaders of Birmingham's economic community. In the course of the negotiations, certain promises were made by the merchants, for example, to remove the store's humiliating racial signs. On the basis of these promises, the Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth and the leaders of the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights agreed to a moratorium on all demonstrations. As the weeks and months went by, we realized that we were the victims of a broken promise. A few signs, briefly removed, returned. The others remained. Okay, so he uses a word in paragraph 7 that he mentioned in paragraph 6. So I'm going to circle it. Negotiations. Okay, and when we go back to paragraph 6, we see that step 2 is negotiation. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a little arrow right here and say step 2. All right, so he's telling us about step 2. All right, and the second half of the paragraph talks to us about why they had to go forward, why they had to keep going. Okay? Because promises were broken. And we can infer that if the promises had been kept, then maybe they wouldn't have had to move forward at all, right? Okay, paragraph 8. As in so many past experiences, our hopes had been blasted and the shadow of deep disappointment settled upon us. We had no alternative except to prepare for direct action, whereby we would present our very bodies as a means of laying our case before the conscience of the local and the national community. Mindful of the difficulties involved, we decided to undertake a process of self-purification. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there, and actually I'm going to underline self-purification, because I remember, again, back in this paragraph, that is step 3, self-purification. So let me go ahead and draw an arrow and write step 3. Okay. We began a series of workshops on nonviolence, and we repeatedly asked ourselves, are you able to accept blows without retaliating? Are you able to endure the ordeal of jail? We decided to schedule our direct action program for the Easter season, realizing that except for Christmas, this is the main shopping period of the year. Knowing that a strong economic withdrawal program would be the byproduct of direct action, we felt that this would be the best time to bring pressure to bear on the merchants for the needed change. So then he explains the logic please excuse my cats, behind the timing. Okay, so I'm going to guess in paragraph 9, he's going to go ahead and talk to us about the fourth step, which is actually doing the nonviolent direct action. Okay. Then it occurred to us that Birmingham's mayoral election was coming up in March, and we speedily decided to postpone action until after Election Day. When we discovered that the Commissioner of Public Safety, Eugene Bull Connor, had piled up enough votes to be in the runoff, we decided again to postpone action until the day after the runoff so that the demonstrations could not be used to cloud the issues. So, decided to hold off so that the focus of the election would be on the issues. Okay. Like many others, we waited to see Mr. Connor defeated, and to this end we endured postponement after postponement. Having aided in this community need, we felt that our direct action program could be delayed no longer. You may well ask, why direct action? Why sit-ins, marches, and so forth? Isn't negotiation a better path? You are quite right in calling for negotiation. Indeed, this is the very purpose of direct action. But I'm going to make a note here, because why direct action? Why sit-ins, marches, and so forth? Isn't negotiation a better path? So in my mind, yes, negotiation would be great, but they tried it, right? They already tried negotiating. But no one listened. Okay. We're going to finish up paragraph 10. Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and foster such a tension that a community which has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. It seeks so to dramatize the issue that it can no longer be ignored. My citing the creation of tension as part of the work of the nonviolent resistor may sound rather shocking, but I must confess that I am not afraid of the word tension. I have earnestly opposed violent tension, but there is a type of constructive, nonviolent tension which is necessary for growth. Just as Socrates felt that it was necessary to create a tension in the mind so that individuals could rise from the bondage of myths and half-truths to the unfettered realm of creative analysis and objective appraisal, so must we see the need for nonviolent gadflies to create the kind of tension in society that will help men rise from the dark depths of prejudice and racism to the majestic heights of understanding and brotherhood. Okay, in the second half of paragraph 10, I notice that he repeats tension a lot. So I'm going to go ahead and circle every time I see tension. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so he uses the word tension 7 times. He repeats the word tension. And I think that's interesting because he talks about constructive tension that helps us grow. Okay, I like that. I think that's really interesting. And I think that down here too, so must we see the need for nonviolent gadflies to create the kind of tension in society that will help men rise from the dark depths of prejudice and racism to the majestic heights of understanding and brotherhood. So MLK is saying that tension is necessary to grow beyond racism / bigotry and become an understanding and more loving member of a community. Okay, so I just summarized paragraph 10 in my own words. I'm going to go ahead and stop here. What I would like for you to do is to continue annotating until about paragraph 20 if you could, and we will go over this tomorrow. Thanks, folks.